They say the truck only comes for those who are already marked. But no one ever tells you how or when the marking happens. You could go your whole life thinking you're safe, until the night it parks outside your house. I never believed the stories. It was just another late shift at the security desk. My job was simple. Sit in a small booth, watch the security monitors, and sign off on maintenance logs. By the time my shift ended at 11:30 p.m., the town was dead quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing. I drove home like I always did, taking the long route through Black Hollow's back roads. A shortcut existed, but no one took it after dark. Not since the disappearances started. Needing caffeine to fight off exhaustion, I pulled into the old gas station at the edge of town. The place always had a stale, dusty smell, like it had been abandoned years ago, but somehow kept running. The cashier, a guy named Benji, barely looked up from his magazine when I walked in. I grabbed a black coffee and stood near the counter when I heard the voice. "It took someone again last night," an old man murmured. I turned my head slightly, pretending not to listen. "Who?" Benji asked, sounding uninterested. "Don't know. Some kid from the south side. His folks found the front door open. No sign of him. But the neighbors." The old man lowered his voice. "They heard the truck." Benji sighed. "Maybe he just ran away. Kids disappear all the time." The old man scoffed. "And leave his phone, his shoes, his damn jacket? Ain't no runaway, boy. The truck came for him." I finally glanced over. The man had a face like crumpled leather, deep lines etched into his forehead. His hands, thin and veiny, trembled slightly as he gripped his coffee cup. I'd heard the truck stories before. A black, unmarked vehicle that appeared at midnight. It never made a sound, just sat there waiting. Some claimed they heard whispers coming from it. Others swore they saw the driver, a man with hollow eyes who never blinked. And once the truck left, someone was always gone. Urban legends. Small-town paranoia. That's all it was. "You believe that stuff?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. The old man's cloudy eyes locked onto mine. "Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is that when the truck comes, you don't go outside." Benji chuckled and rang up my coffee. "Ignore him, man. He's been saying the same thing for 20 years. I smirked, handing over a crumpled bill. Guess the truck must be real patient then. The old man didn't laugh. He just stared at me, his fingers tightening around the cup. I left without another word. As I pulled out of the gas station, I checked my rearview mirror. The old man was still watching me through the window, his expression unreadable. By the time I got home, the whole conversation had faded from my mind. I locked my door, tossed my keys on the table, and sat on the couch. That's when I heard it. A low, steady rumble outside. I frowned, moving to the window. The street was dark, empty. But then I saw the glow of something at the far end of the block. Faint red taillights, barely visible through the fog. An engine idled softly. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was just a coincidence. I turned away, but my chest felt heavy, like something was watching me. That was the first night the truck came. I woke up to the sound of an engine. A deep, low rumble, steady and slow, like it had been running for a long time. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My room was dark, the kind of heavy darkness that settles after midnight. I turned my head toward the window, squinting against the glow of the streetlight outside. Then I heard it again, that soft, constant hum, vibrating through the walls. A truck. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Who would be parked outside at this hour? This was Black Hollow, a quiet town where nothing ever happened after sundown. I lived on a dead-end street. There was no reason for anyone to be here. Something about the sound made my skin prickle. It wasn't just the noise, it was the way it felt, like it was pressing in from all directions. I hesitated before pulling the curtain aside, just an inch. There it was. A large, black truck sat parked across the street, right in front of my house. Its headlights were off, but I could see the outline clearly under the dim glow of the street lamp. It wasn't a normal pickup truck. This thing was bigger, older, built like it had seen years of use. The kind of vehicle that didn't just break down in random neighborhoods. But the worst part wasn't the truck. Someone was standing beside it. A tall figure, barely visible in the shadows. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing my house. My breath caught in my throat. I let the curtain fall back in place, heart hammering in my chest. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone's engine died, and they were waiting for a tow. That was the logical explanation, right? But deep down, I knew better. A memory surfaced, something from my childhood. Late-night whispers. Old warnings passed down from the older folks in town. If you see the truck, stay inside. No matter what. I hadn't thought about those stories in years. They had always sounded like local folklore, a way to keep kids from wandering the streets at night. But now, sitting in the dark, I wasn't so sure. The engine was still running. Slow. Steady. Waiting. I reached for my phone, but the screen showed something that made my stomach drop. No signal. I turned my wrist to check the time on my watch. 12 a.m. The hands weren't moving. I swallowed hard. Outside, the truck remained. The figure hadn't moved. And then, a soft knock on my window. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The low hum of an engine filled the silence of the night, steady and unbroken. It wasn't the sound of a car driving by, or someone pulling into a driveway. No, it was different, like it was waiting. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. The screen flickered, the numbers barely readable. My phone, which I always kept beside me, had gone dark. No service, no Wi-Fi, just a black screen reflecting my uneasy face. A chill crept up my spine as I slid out of bed and moved toward the window. My fingers hesitated on the blinds, but my curiosity won over my fear. Slowly, I pulled them apart. There it was. A large, black truck sat across the street, its surface dull under the dim glow of the streetlight. The headlights were off, but the engine still rumbled, sending faint vibrations through the air. Steam or smoke, maybe both, rose from the exhaust, curling into the night sky like ghostly fingers. Someone was standing next to it. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, didn't breathe, just stood there, facing my house. I let the blinds snap shut, my pulse racing. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just a truck. Just some guy parked outside. Maybe an engine issue. Maybe a lost traveler checking a map. But deep down, I knew better. This town had stories. Old warnings whispered in hushed voices. If you see the truck, stay inside. No matter what. I locked my bedroom door. Then the front door. The windows. Every latch. Every bolt. I told myself I was being paranoid. That I was overreacting. Then I heard the footsteps. Slow. Steady. Crunching against the gravel outside my house. A soft tap sounded against the window. And then, a whisper. Come outside, Joao. We've been waiting. I sat on the edge of my bed, my breath shallow, my fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. The house was completely silent, except for the low hum of the truck's idling engine outside. It had been there for what felt like an eternity. Waiting. I tried to convince myself it was just some random vehicle, maybe a neighbor's visitor, or a lost driver stopping to check a map. But deep down, I knew better. Something about it felt wrong. My phone was still dead. No signal. No Wi-Fi. My watch flickered again, 12 a.m., frozen in time. Then came the sound. A soft crunch of gravel. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving outside. I swallowed hard and forced myself to stay still. But then a knock. Not on the door. Not on the walls. On my window. It was light at first. A gentle tap, almost polite. Then another. And another. I gripped my blanket tighter, heart pounding against my ribs. Then came the voice. Joao. It was a whisper, barely audible, yet somehow I heard it clear as day. It wasn't coming from my phone or from outside my house. It was just there, floating in the air, curling around my ears. A chill crawled down my spine. Come outside, Joao. We've been waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Another knock. More insistent this time. I forced myself to breathe slowly. The old stories rushed back to me. The warnings I had laughed at as a kid. The truck. The disappearances. The people who stepped outside and were never seen again. But I wasn't a kid anymore. This was real. I had to see it for myself. I stood up, moving carefully through the darkness. The wooden floor was cold beneath my feet. Each step felt heavier, like something was trying to hold me back. The window was only a few feet away. I hesitated. The air in the room had changed, thicker, heavier, like I was walking through invisible water. My fingers trembled as I reached for the blinds. I could just take a quick look, just to prove to myself that nothing was there. Just a peek. I held my breath and pulled the blinds aside. And there he was. A man stood right outside my window, inches from the glass. His face was too pale. His eyes, too dark. His mouth was stretched into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, he raised a hand and tapped the glass. Slow, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. A jolt of terror shot through me, and I stumbled backward. The whisper returned, curling into my ears like cold fingers. You're already halfway here, Joao. Just step outside. The knocking stopped. The man didn't move. He just stared at me, waiting. I took another shaky step back. Then, behind him, the truck door creaked open. Something shifted inside. I didn't wait to see what. I turned and bolted for the door, my heartbeat hammering against my skull. I had to get out of here. Or maybe, just maybe, I was already too late. I stood there, frozen. My heart was pounding in my chest, so loud that it almost drowned out the sound of the engine idling. The truck had been parked in front of my house for what felt like forever, but now it was as if the night had stopped moving altogether. The figure by the truck didn't move. He stood still, his back to me, tall and thin, a shadow under the dim streetlight. I wanted to look away. I wanted to close the blinds, lock the doors, and pretend none of this was happening. But my body didn't listen. Something inside me was forcing me to watch, as if I had no choice. And then, he moved. It was slow at first, a slight tilt of his head, as if he was listening for something in the night. Then he turned his body toward me, as if he knew I was watching. His face was hidden in the darkness, but I could feel his gaze, cold and unnatural, piercing through the window. The air around him seemed to warp, the streetlight flickering like it couldn't decide if it wanted to shine on him or not. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My instinct screamed at me to stay inside, to lock everything and hide. But something else, something deeper, was pulling me toward him. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something worse. A need, almost. Come outside, Joao, the voice called, but it wasn't loud. It was soft, almost like a whisper carried by the wind, but it was the kind of whisper that felt like it was inside your head. We've been waiting. I shivered. My name had never sounded like that before. The way it rolled off his tongue felt wrong. Too intimate, too knowing. I wanted to run, to retreat into the safety of my house, but my feet wouldn't move. I was stuck, pinned in place, like I was being held by invisible strings. The air grew thicker, heavy with a pressure I couldn't shake. I felt like I was being drawn into something far darker than I could understand. And then he took a step forward. Slowly, almost like he was savoring the moment, as if he knew that every step was pushing me further into something I couldn't escape. The truck door creaked open, its hinges protesting, but the sound felt too loud in the otherwise silent night. My heart skipped a beat. I should have turned back. I should have slammed the door and locked every window, every door. But my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't look away from him. He raised his hand, and in his palm was something small, something familiar. It glinted in the dim light, and a wave of recognition hit me like a cold slap to the face. It was my old keychain, the one I'd had when I was a kid, the one I lost in the woods years ago. It had always been my favorite, a little metal car with a tiny key that turned. I had searched for it for days when I'd lost it, but it was gone, vanished without a trace. And now, here it was, in the hand of a man I'd never seen before. Where did you get that? My voice cracked, a tremor of fear I couldn't control slipping through. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the keychain swing between his fingers, the metal reflecting the faint light. His eyes, though hidden in the shadows, seemed to glimmer as he spoke again, low and calm. You've been marked for a long time, Joao, he said. You just didn't know it. I felt my stomach drop. The words seemed to echo in the night, repeating themselves over and over in my head. Marked. For a long time. The meaning twisted in my mind, but I didn't want to understand it. I didn't want to know what it meant. But it was too late. The back door of the truck suddenly swung open with a violent force, like it had been waiting for this moment. It wasn't just the door that moved. Something else, something darker, seemed to pour out of it, spilling like smoke or fog. I couldn't see clearly. Shadows writhed in the back of the truck, figures shifting, but they weren't human. They weren't even alive. I could hear them. No, feel them, scratching at the edges of my sanity, their whispers growing louder. Desperate, begging. Help us. They whispered. Help us, Joao. But I couldn't. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the truck, from the shadows, from the man, Paul, standing there in the stillness. The world around me seemed to bend, twisting like a nightmare. The air grew colder. My breath came out in uneven, ragged gasps, but it didn't help. The pressure, the weight, it felt like the walls of the house were closing in, like everything was shifting, changing, pulling me in. The truck's engine roared to life, the sudden sound making me jump. I flinched, my body finally moving, but the force of it, the sound, the presence, held me down. The truck's headlights flicked on, blinding me for a moment, and then nothing. The engine fell silent. I blinked, trying to clear the fog in my head, but when I looked outside again, the truck was gone. Just like that, like it had never been there. The street was empty, the air still. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. But then I saw it. My childhood keychain was lying on the ground in front of the door. It had fallen through the crack under the door, just a few inches from my feet. And I knew that whatever had just happened was far from over. I froze. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat louder than the last. The voice, Paul's voice, felt like it was crawling inside my head, making it spin. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to the ground, while my eyes were locked on the truck. My mind was racing, trying to piece together everything that had just happened. How did I end up here? Why had I stepped outside? The wind picked up slightly, swirling around me like a cold whisper. I tried to shake it off, but the more I did, the heavier the air felt. Paul stepped closer, his face now fully visible under the dim light from the truck. His eyes, they weren't human, at least not in the way I understood it. There was something unnerving about them, like they weren't just looking at me, but through me, as though he could see the very soul behind my thoughts. He didn't speak for a moment, just stood there, staring. Then he reached into his pocket, slowly, like he knew I was watching. My stomach tightened as he pulled something out. Something small, familiar. He opened his hand, and I saw it. My childhood keychain. The one I had lost when I was 10. The one I'd searched for weeks before giving up, convinced it had just vanished in a thin air. It was a tiny metal car, worn and scratched from years of use. I remembered how it had jingled when I shook it, the way it had always been in my pocket as a child. Seeing it now, clutched between Paul's fingers, made my blood run cold. "Recognize it?" Paul asked, his voice low and smooth, like honey slipping through a crack in ice. "You've been marked for a long time, Joao. You just didn't know it." I wanted to scream, to run, but the words caught in my throat. The truck, the figure, it was all coming together. A memory pushed through the fog of my mind. A story my grandmother had told me when I was young, about the truck that took people away, never to be seen again. "You don't want to see the truck at midnight. If you do, you're already chosen," she had warned me. I had laughed it off then. I wasn't laughing now. The truck's engine rumbled, but it wasn't the sound of an engine. It felt like something else, something dark and ancient, alive with power. The truck's back door creaked open slowly, a sound that seemed to echo in my bones. At first, I thought it was empty, but then I saw it. Someone, moving inside. It wasn't a person. No, not anymore. Shadowy, contorted shapes shifted in the truck, and, as they did, I could hear them. Whispers. Soft, desperate voices, each one a plea. A cry. They sounded so familiar, so real. "Help us," they whispered. "Please." I stepped back, horrified, unable to tear my eyes away from the darkness inside the truck. The hands, pale and thin, reached out from the shadows, clawing at the air. They weren't fully human, but they weren't fully something else either. They were broken, twisted, like they were caught between life and death, between this world and another. The air around me grew thick, and I could barely breathe. It was like the truck was pulling at my soul, trying to drag me into the abyss with it. My feet wouldn't obey me. I tried to move, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away. "Come closer," Paul's voice said again, this time with an almost affectionate edge, like he was talking to a pet, not a person. "You don't want to be left out. You never know when the truck will come again." I was shaking, my breath shallow, my chest tight with panic. "WH, what are they?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Paul tilted his head, his lips curling into something between a smile and a sneer. "You could have been one of them, Joao. But now, well, you're marked. You can't escape it. No one can." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Marked. It wasn't a coincidence that the truck had stopped at my house tonight. It wasn't chance. The truck had been looking for me, and I had stepped right into its trap. The people inside the truck, if they could even be called people anymore, weren't victims. They were the ones who had stepped outside. They were the ones who had ignored the warnings. And now, they were the ones trapped in the void, reaching out for anyone else foolish enough to come too close. I felt the pull again, stronger this time. It wasn't just a truck. It was something inside me, something deep in my chest, urging me to move forward, to let it take me, to join them. But I couldn't. Not yet. I tore my gaze away from the truck and turned to run. My legs felt like lead, each step heavier than the last. But as I made it back to my front door, I heard Paul's voice one last time, softer, almost kind. "You'll be back, Joao. Everyone comes back." I slammed the door behind me, locking it, my heart racing in my chest. I stumbled back into the living room, my mind reeling for what I had just seen. I could still hear those whispers in my ears, faint but clear. The truck was gone. Paul was gone. But the feeling wasn't. It lingered. The horrors I had witnessed tonight weren't over. They had only just begun, and I was already marked. The air in my house felt heavier, like something was pressing down on my chest. The silence outside was unnerving, but the silence inside, that was something else entirely. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I backed away from the door, still staring at the spot where the truck had been. I half expected it to be parked there when I looked again, but it wasn't. The engine's hum was gone. The figure, the truck, they had vanished. I rushed to the window, my hands shaking as I drew back the curtain. Nothing. The street was empty. The only light came from the dull glow of the street lamps, casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. The fog, which had been thick earlier, now seemed to hang in the air like a shroud, and for a moment, I thought I could see shapes moving within it. But I couldn't afford to focus on that. I had to get inside, lock the doors, and not look back. I slammed the blinds down with a force I hadn't intended. The sound of it was almost violent, a sudden jolt to my already fragile nerves. My breath came in shallow bursts. What was that? I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see something behind me, but nothing moved in the dark room. The truck was gone. The voice was gone. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted, though. It was still there, like a stone pressing into me. I moved quickly, locking every door, checking every window. My hands fumbled with the locks, and I felt stupid for not having done this sooner. What if it came back? What if it never left? I went to the kitchen to grab a knife, something, anything that could give me a shred of control. The cold steel in my hand didn't make me feel safer, though. It just reminded me of how vulnerable I truly was. There was no hiding from this. There was no running. And then, I heard it. A soft creak. At first, I thought it was the house settling, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. Footsteps. Light, deliberate steps, as if someone was pacing around the perimeter of the house. My stomach dropped. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that it was just my mind playing tricks, but I knew better. I knew what was happening. I tiptoed back to the window, heart racing in my chest. Slowly, I pushed the curtain aside just enough to peer outside, my eyes scanning the darkness. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see, but I had to. The truck was gone. I wasn't sure if I should feel relief or dread, but that was when I noticed something else. The air outside wasn't the same. It wasn't cold, but it was thick, as if the night itself was holding its breath. A sound came from the edge of the street, just beyond the light of the lamp. A rustle in the bushes. And then I saw it. A figure, standing motionless in the shadows. I couldn't make out the details at first. Just the outline of a man, tall, thin, and utterly still. He wasn't moving like a person should. He was like a statue, just there, existing in the periphery of my vision. My throat went dry, and the knife in my hand suddenly felt very small, very useless. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't a loud knock. It wasn't a desperate knock, either. It was soft, gentle, almost like a whisper in the form of a sound. 3 taps. Slow, deliberate, like someone waiting for a response. The knock didn't come from the door. It came from the window, the same window I had just been standing in front of. I froze. The fog outside had thickened again, and now the figure was closer. The knock sounded again, this time louder, more insistent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My mind screamed for me to run, to hide, but my body didn't listen. I was rooted to the spot. Then I heard the voice. It was familiar, though I couldn't place it at first. It sounded like it was coming from inside my head, the voice smooth and deep, like something born from the shadows themselves. "Joao," it whispered. "We've been waiting." I felt my legs buckle beneath me, and I dropped the knife. The clatter it made as it hit the floor seemed to echo through the room, louder than anything else I'd heard that night. My breath came in ragged gasps. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The voice wrapped itself around my mind, tightening, suffocating. "Come outside, Joao." It coaxed, now almost tender. "You're meant to join us." I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that when I opened them again, it would all be gone. But when I did, the figure was still there, closer now, the shape more defined. The shadowy figure had an almost humanoid form, but there was something off about it, something wrong. The edges of its silhouette seemed to blur and shift, as if it wasn't quite solid, like it was made of mist and smoke. The voice spoke again, this time from the figure's lips. "You've always known. You just didn't believe." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The world felt too close, too tight. And then, as if on cue, I heard a soft, almost distant sound, the truck's engine. Idling. Waiting. The panic hit me all at once. I snapped out of my trance, turning away from the window and stumbling toward the back door. I had to get out. I had to run. But as I reached the door, it opened by itself. Not slowly, like a natural movement, but quickly, almost violently. The darkness beyond the door seemed to swallow the light from the room, a suffocating blackness that beckoned. I couldn't fight it. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor. All I could hear was the whispering. It was everywhere. In the walls. In my head. It was no longer a choice. I had already stepped into it. The truck was still waiting. I thought I was free. The truck was gone. The strange man, the pull of that unnatural force, they had all vanished like smoke in the night. For a moment, I stood in the middle of my living room, chest heaving, heart pounding so loudly I could hardly think. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and something else, something older, like damp earth or decay. I should have been relieved. I should have felt safe. But I didn't. I didn't feel anything except this gnawing sense that something wasn't right, something was off, deep down inside me. I told myself it was just fear. I had seen something terrible, but I was still alive. I had escaped. That was what mattered, right? I stumbled to the window, pressing my palms against the cool glass. The street outside was empty, just the usual streetlights casting long, pale shadows across the pavement. The truck was gone, as if it had never been there at all. No signs of it, no tire tracks in the gravel, nothing to show that I had just lived through something that should have been impossible. I turned back, breathing in short, ragged breaths, telling myself I needed to calm down. I needed to think. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. The reflection in the window, it didn't look like mine. The figure standing behind me in a dark room didn't move when I did. My heart skipped. I turned slowly, thinking maybe it was just the angle of the moonlight playing tricks, but no. There, in the window's reflection, was someone else. It looked like me, but it wasn't. The eyes staring back at me were wide, wide in a way that made my stomach tighten. The face was twisted in a grotesque smile, too wide, too sharp. The mouth didn't look right, as if it had stretched unnaturally, pulled in some way that felt wrong. It was like I was looking at myself, but through someone else's eyes, someone with a twisted view of the world. I froze, my feet stuck to the floor. My reflection didn't move with me. I raised my hand, slowly, trembling, and so did the reflection, but it didn't look like mine. It didn't mimic me. It reached out with an unsettling slowness, as if it had its own mind, its own intentions. It was wrong. "Joao." The whisper came, so faint at first I wasn't sure if I heard it or if it was in my head. Then again, louder, this time unmistakable. "Joao." I spun around, but there was no one in the room. The silence was thick, suffocating. My breath caught in my throat. I turned back to the window. The figure was still there, still staring. I tried to scream, but my voice caught. The words wouldn't come out. The thing in the reflection seemed to smile wider, impossibly wide. And then, just as I felt my knees buckle under me, it winked. It winked at me, a slow, deliberate motion, as if to say, "I know something you don't." The blood in my veins ran cold. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. I hit the ground hard, my hands shaking, my breath shallow and fast. I tried to push myself up, but the reflection, it wasn't mine anymore. It moved on its own. It didn't mimic my movements. It was doing things I wasn't. It was bending in ways that didn't make sense. No, 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 no. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the window, but the reflection didn't stop following me. It followed me, even when I closed my eyes, even when I turned away. Every time I opened them, it was there, grinning, stretching, reaching, waiting. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind was racing, but there was nothing to hold on to, nothing to make sense of what was happening. Then I remembered. The truck, the curse, the warnings. I was marked. The reflection, the thing that wasn't me. It wasn't my reflection at all. It was Paul's, the collector's. I had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and now it was too late. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun barely peeks through the clouds, and the streets remained still, like the town was holding its breath. I hadn't been outside for days. Not since the truck. Not since I realized that whatever was out there, it wasn't human anymore. It wasn't even alive, not in the way I had thought. I had tried to go about my life, work, sleep, eat, but nothing felt normal anymore. Not my job at the factory, not the radio humming through the car speakers, and certainly not the house that now felt hollow and empty. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the truck. I could hear the whispers, feel the cold pull that had dragged me closer to the edge of the world. When I left the house that morning, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe answers, maybe something to make it stop. But when I turned onto Main Street, I saw it. The truck, not parked in front of my house, but at the very edge of town. It was parked like it had been waiting for someone else. The same matte black finish, the same eerie headlights off. But this time, the figure by the door wasn't Paul. It was a man I'd never seen before. I stopped my car across the street. I should have driven right past it, turned the corner, kept going. But instead, I parked, my hands trembling on the wheel. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the truck. I didn't know why, but I felt like I was supposed to stay. Like if I left now, it would find me later, perhaps in my sleep, or worse, in my own home. I couldn't run. Not anymore. I got out of the car, my legs shaking. My breath came in shallow, quick bursts. The street was empty, as always, the silence pressing down on me like a thick blanket. The man by the truck didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with hollow eyes, like he knew exactly what I was thinking. "Joao," he called out, his voice like a low hum, distorted. It was wrong. It wasn't a voice a man should have. "We've been waiting for you." I froze. My feet felt like they were glued to the ground. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused. I watched as the man stepped closer, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something dark, something that shouldn't have been there. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. All I could do was stare as he took a slow step toward me, his boots scraping against the pavement. He wasn't real, I thought. He couldn't be. But his voice, the way he said my name, there was no mistaking it. He was real, and I was not going to escape this. "Step closer, Joao," the man whispered. "Step closer. It's your turn now." The truck's engine rumbled to life behind him, a sound that seemed to echo in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't the sound of a regular truck. It was deeper, older, like a creature awakening after a long sleep. I couldn't look away from the truck. I couldn't look away from him. And then, as I stood there, frozen in place, the whispers came again, this time louder, more desperate. "Help us." I recognized those voices. They were the same voices I'd heard before, in the dark, in my dreams. The voices of the missing, the ones who had disappeared just like me. The figure in front of me smiled, a cold, empty smile, and extended his hand. "Come with us, Joao. You've been chosen. It's your turn." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But all I could do was stand there, caught in the pull of the truck, the pull of whatever curse had attached itself to me, to this town. A noise behind me startled me. I turned. For just a second, I thought it was someone else, a neighbor, maybe, walking down the street. But no one was there. It was just me in the truck. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, trying to pull myself together, but the truck had already won. The whispers were too loud. They filled my head. The voices, the faces, all of them staring at me, calling me. I opened my eyes. The man was gone. The truck was gone. And just like that, I was alone. Alone in the silence of the street. Alone in the empty town. Alone with the realization that it would never end. I tried to walk back to my car, but my legs wouldn't move. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest that I thought it would burst. My head spun with confusion, with fear, with everything I had seen and heard in those few moments. Then I heard it. The engine. The deep rumble that sent chills down my spine. I turned. The truck was back, idling right in front of me. I was standing at the edge of it, unable to move, unable to breathe. The man, Paul, or whatever he was, appeared in front of the truck again. And in that moment, I knew. It was my turn. The truck's door creaked open, and before I could even think, something pulled me forward. My feet dragged, my legs screamed for resistance, but it was too late. The door swung wide, and the shadows inside seemed to stretch toward me, reaching, clawing. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. I was marked. And so, the cycle continued. Another town, another house, another soul, another night. But this time, I was the one waiting for the next one to step outside. I don't know who they are. I don't know who will be next. But I can tell you this. If you see that truck, if you hear the whispers in the dark, you better stay inside. You better lock your doors. Because once you step outside, you'll never be the same again.